ends with the British conquest of Canada. And then settlers from Connecticut, Massachusetts, and New Hampshire come flooding into what's now Vermont. And they're granted land by the governor of New Hampshire, and so it becomes called the New Hampshire Grants. New Hampshire's granting land in the New England township system, so groups of settlers are applying for grants of land to form towns. They are purchasing land that they own. They're building farms on that land, the produce of which belongs to them. And New York and New Hampshire don't agree about who owns the New Hampshire grants. New York claims everything to the Connecticut River. They go to the King of England. In 1764, the king sides with New York and says, yep, it belongs to New York. New Hampshire kind of dumps their claim and says, King's decided, we'll back off. And New York invalidates all of the New Hampshire grants. Says we don't recognize those as valid. A lot of the towns, especially in the Connecticut River Valley, they're going to apply to New York for an identical grant. They're going to have to pay for it a second time. But New York says, yeah, that's fine, and they get to keep their town, and that's great. In the western side of the New Hampshire grants, a lot of that area has already been earmarked by the governor of New York to be granted to others. Now, New York had a land grant system that partially dated back to the old Dutch system, where they would grant huge tracts of land to one wealthy, connected individual, and they would kind of run that grant as their personal fiefdom a little bit. So for the people on the western side of the New Hampshire grants, what this meant was the land that you purchased doesn't belong to you. It belongs to this wealthy New Yorker, and you're either going to be evicted and you get nothing in return, bye, or you can pay rent for the privilege of staying on land you've already bought and living on the farm that you built. And they found that to be intolerable. In that time period, all men between 16 and 60 were required to do compulsory militia service. They would train. In times of war, they could be called up to serve. And these militias started actively opposing New York Dominion. And so they would run off settlers, sheriffs, surveyors, tax collectors. They would protest the courts that were running the eviction process. And so they kind of became known as the Green Mountain Boys, and Ethan Allen became a leader in the Green Mountain Boys, engaged in a lot of that activity. For instance, the town of Vergennes traded hands multiple times. Eventually the Allens built a blockhouse at the falls to defend it against New York. New York put a price on Ethan Allen's head. So that's where we're at leading into the American Revolution. After the Battle of Lexington and Concord, Ethan Allen takes the Green Mountain Boys and goes and captures Fort Ticonderoga. As a result, he gains a certain level of legitimacy. He writes to the Continental Congress saying what he's done. And so what ends up happening is the Green Mountain Boys are recruited into a regiment of New York militia. Okay? So for the Green Mountain Boys, they go from being kind of a outlaw terrorist organization to a regiment that's recognized. They get some legitimacy. On the New York side, they're getting a certain amount of control. So it's kind of a fair trade on both sides. So when the Green Mountain Boys go to elect their leaders, they elect their company officers, they elect Seth Warner as lieutenant colonel. When it comes time to elect a colonel, they just don't elect one. So Ethan Allen gets sidelined from the Green Mountain Boys after that. He's going to lead his own attack on Montreal by himself with 80 guys and get captured in September of 1775. But the Green Mountain Boys that were recruited into this New York regiment become known as Warner's Regiment. And that's us, Colonel Seth Warner's Regiment of Foot, recreated. They're going to be a New York regiment heading into Canada in 1775. They're going to cover the retreat from Canada in 1776, taking off the hospital with them as they evacuate Quebec. And in honor of the good service they provide, they're going to be made a Continental Army Regiment. So standard U.S. Army, no longer militia. And not reporting to any state. So they are owned directly by Congress. They're one of the additional or extra Continental regiments. And what this means is, so by this time Vermont has declared independence from New York. It's technically an independent republic fighting a parallel war of independence from Great Britain. And this is sort of Congress tacitly admitting that maybe the New Hampshire grants and Vermont are not part of New York. But we're not going to make a decision. New York still claims that Vermont belongs to them. They're almost going to go to war with each other in 1780 on this question. But so, where we're at...
safety.
Sure.
And then we'll report back.
Sounds good. So they're going to do safety inspection. It's something that we do every time we shoot muskets. And every time we're done shooting muskets. This is a way of making sure our muskets are clean, nothing is in the barrel. They're going to, from the shoulder, secure their firelock. So they're going to, okay, nothing fell out, good job. Then they're going to ping their barrels, which I showed you earlier. And then they're going to stand at the poise. And their NCOs are going to individually check their muskets. At the half cock, they're going to pull the trigger and make sure that it doesn't go off at the half cock. They're going to wiggle the flint, make sure it's in securely, wiggle the hammer, make sure nothing's wrong there, make sure the flash guard is good, they're looking for rust, and if it's found to be in order, nothing will be done. It's on the private and the corporals of the privates to make sure that nothing gets found at the time that you get to the platoon inspection. Everything should already be good. You will be publicly shamed if there's any findings. Yep.
In use of Virginia, blockhouse in Virginia, is there any markers or anything in Virginia with the balls?
Are you from Virgins? Okay. I don't know if there's any markers about the blockhouse. I'm not well versed on Vermont's historical markers. Virgins has a storied history during that time period. It was settled. The Yorkers came and took it over. The Green Mountain Boys ejected them. The Yorkers came back with a bunch of Scottish immigrants. The Green Mountain Boys came back and ejected them, built the blockhouse. In 1777, a lot of the Patriots left on orders from Vermont as the British advanced down the Champlain Valley. Anyone who stayed there was suspicion they might be a loyalist. So some of the land was confiscated and sold, and that funded the American war effort from the Vermont perspective. And then in 1778, the British then thought, well, anyone who's still there must be an enemy. So they came down, burned Middlebury, Virgins, New Haven, Ferrisburgh, Panton, Moncton, basically all of what's now Addison County, and then retreated back to Canada. So huge parts of Vermont were depopulated throughout the course of the war, either through evacuation or raids and burning.
Return, rammers!
Okay. So now they're going to individually inspect the muskets. Before we go on the field, we're also, there's an inspection. Is your cartridge box full? Is your canteen full? Making sure that all of the soldiers are in good order to be running, jumping, climbing trees, safely firing muskets.
We're doing the same thing we did last time.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Yep. So green coats with red facings. Every regiment is going to have a uniform, ideally, at least in the Continental Army. Some militia regiments might too. They wouldn't get issued coats as regularly as they should, so there might be a Continental Regiment that looks like a militia regiment. That's just the way it goes sometimes. We were contracted to have green coats with red facings in the fall of 1775. We don't actually have documentation of receipt of those coats, so we can't 100% guarantee the green coats with red facings ever arrived, but that's what was ordered and that's what the contract was for.
So, when they, basically officially joined the Continental Army,
Yep.
Were they pretty much stay up here, or did they go down south, or?
So Warner's regiment went to Canada in 75, retreated from Canada in 76, was stationed at Mount Independence and helped build the fortifications there. In 1777, they operated at Ticonderoga. They were at the Battle of Hubbardton, Battle of Bennington, in Brown's Raid at Ticonderoga again, and then we're down around Saratoga at the end. Yes.
Sir, the regiment has been properly safety checked. They are
Bit. Ready for action, sir.
Run one by the numbers. So right now they are training, and they're standing shoulder to shoulder. It's often how the Revolutionary War is depicted in books and film. The British themselves did this exactly one time at the Battle of Bunker Hill in June of 1775 and sustained 50% casualties attacking Americans in fortified positions. They never did it again. After that, close order in the British Army was an arm's length between men. So they were adapting to their surroundings very early on and taking appropriate action to ensure that they were receiving minimal loss. This is the easiest way to control large bodies of troops. So troops that don't have a ton of training, bunch them together. You can kind of herd them around the field. They're easier to control. They don't have to think for themselves. You can communicate more clearly. So I'm going to demonstrate what they're doing as they fire one round by the numbers. They come to the priming position. Half cock. The cock comes back until it clicks once. It's not going to go off here. They're going to grab a cartridge of a musket ball. They don't have musket balls in the cartridges right now. It's just black powder. Musket ball, black powder wrapped in paper. And they're going to bring it to the mouth.
Charge with cartridge!
It's supposed to be prime. So they're going to bite the paper and pour a little bit of black powder into that pan right there.
Shut! Pan!
There's a little touch hole right there where the ignition's going to go through to ignite the main charge when they fire.
Charge with cartridge!
Then they're going to pour the rest of the powder down the barrel. If they had a musket ball, the musket ball would then go in.
Draw! Rammers! We're ramming the powder.
Then the rammer comes out.
Ram cartridge!
And that just seats the powder and the ball down at the bottom of the barrel. And then the rammer goes back into its slot. They're going to return the rammers. They're going to come up to the recover. This is the universal signal for I am loaded, I am ready. It's a visual cue. It's going to become important in a little bit. Make ready. They're going to pull back to the full cock.
You're clear.
Freeze it!
They are going to point the barrel at whatever they want to die.
Wow.
A couple of misfires there. So when they pull that trigger, this sharp flint is in a vise on the cock. Okay, so go off at half cocked. You don't want that to happen, but that's where that term comes from. It's going to fly forward because there's a metal spring in here. That flint is going to hit the hammer, and it's going to shave little pieces of steel off that hammer. When that happens, they're going to be hot. It's going to be sparks. Those sparks are going to fall down into the pan, ignite the black powder that's in the pan. That ignition is going to travel through that touch hole into the barrel, where it will ignite the main charge and drive the ball out the barrel. So I'll show you some sparks here. And that's how a gun worked for about 100 years.
All right, let's get that ready.
What kind of weapon is that? It's not a brown vest or anything.
So this is a brown bess. In the period, this was called the short land pattern, differentiated from the long land pattern.
Sir. Comments, please, sir.
Yes, please. So once the soldiers are trained and can fire a round by the numbers, following each of the orders, then being able to do it quickly becomes very important. You want to be able to fire 3 or 4 rounds a minute. You need to be able to shoot the enemy before they can get to you. So right now, the order has been prime and load, and they are going through all of those steps as fast as they can. And so this is where coming to the recover lets the commander know when they're done.
Make ready. Freeze it. Fire!
Much better.
Gorgeous! You know what? Whatever that was, it was gorgeous.
Okay. So once they're able to do this, this kind of warfare is great if you're a British soldier who wants to take a lot of casualties at the Battle of Bunker Hill. It's great if you're militia and you want to bunch them together so that they don't break, so that you can control them better. The Green Mountains are largely wooded now. They were even more wooded in the 1770s and 1780s. And so this is not suitable for the kind of terrain that we have here. So they're going to do a different kind of doctrine that's derived from some of the ranging manuals that the British came up with during and after the French and Indian War, and light infantry tactics that they developed during and after the French and Indian War. So everything that we're doing, we stole from the British. The idea that they were robotic and didn't adapt, and we won by hiding behind trees, they invented a lot of this, and they were an incredibly dynamic and effective force. They knew what they were doing, and they were really good at it. So this kind of hat here is called a cocked hat. We often call it a tricorn. In the period, it was a cocked hat. This isn't good for the wood. The branches are going to knock it off. The wind's going to blow it off. So the soldiers are going to cut their hats down into caps of varying styles. The British did the same. When Burgoyne's army came down from Canada in 1777, he had all of his men cut the tails of their coats down and cut their caps down into little jockey caps, or caps of varying styles. You can go to a reenactment and see British caps in a lot of different permutations. So now we're going to talk about why it's so important to be able to load and fire quickly. So we've got an attacking force over here by the fence. They're going to fire around. Now they need to be able to reload and fire again before the attacking force reaches them.
Get it in! Get it in! Charlie, fire
And they did it! So as they open up to what we call the open order, they're going to spread out. Okay. So there's the front row and the back row. We call them ranks.
One, two back.
The groups of two in each rank in front and behind, we call files. So rank and file. So the files are going to spread out from each other. The ranks are going to stay the same.
Take care of your pieces.
They're going to operate at the knee to make smaller targets of themselves. As they move, they're going to use cover that they can find. Again, the British are doing the same thing. This is what warfare was like on the northern frontier.
That's one of them brand new funds they got off that guy yesterday. That's one of them. How long?
When they get around to it. Are there any questions at this point?
The ramrod, it strikes me, if they're trying to do load and reload within 30, it seems very cumbersome to try to get that ramrod into that narrow, hole on the side. Would they do something different?
There are a lot of different techniques that they would use to improve their speed. So the paper cartridge, if you pinch right where the powder ends and bite as low as you can pour much faster and with much more precision. So when you're priming, bite, it can happen that fast. And then you gotta kind of use your thumb to get the ball in a little bit, but then so once the muscle memory is down, it can happen pretty quickly. Another thing that is documented to have occurred on occasion is there are some British light infantry at the Battle of Hubbardton, Vermont, who describe wanting to load faster than they're able, and so they put the ball in and then just pound on the ground to try to get the ball seated and then fire from that. I wouldn't do it, but they say they did it. So
What happens if you don't seat the ball?
So let's say the ball comes down to here, your powder's down here, you risk bursting your gun, because now you have an air cavity. So you're
Captain, sir.
and the ball is up here, so it's not going to start propelling right away.
And that's
Captain
why
Bailey,
ramming,
sir.
even though it's cumbersome, is important. You have to sit it. Yes.
Yes. Okay. So now they've extended to the open order. You can see what that looks like. Now the files are much farther apart.
By section at the advance.
They're going to fire by sections, which is the front rank and the rear rank at the advance. So this is a way to put fire on your enemy while taking ground. You can also do the same while giving ground or while not moving. So fire and maneuver continues to be a key part of warfare.
All right.
In the Revolutionary
Once you get your leg up, we'll try this one again. Training for me too.
So the corporals are giving the firing commands because they're firing
by
by section.
section at the advance.
All right, by section at the advance. First section, make ready. Three, set, fire.
The rear rank
Move
is
up,
going to
move
go
up.
through the front rank. They're going to take some cover as best they can. 5 to 10 yards in front of them. The rear rank is reloaded. Okay? The corporal of the rear rank is looking down his line to see when everyone's just about ready. He's going to communicate with the corporal in the front rank, we're ready. And then the corporal in the front rank will issue his firing commands. This way, half the formation is always loaded and can put fire down range if they're being rushed.
Present! Fire! First section, move up!
Nice shot.
Fire, if you fire, count!
So this type of doctrine requires a lot more training to execute. Right now,
Firing
it's
by
more
section
relatively
at the
open.
stand.
There aren't falling things everywhere. It's flat.
Hey, Josh.
The trees were planted, so they're all relatively equidistant apart in rows. In forest, you're going to have
First section, make
kind of
ready!
chaos, and your line may be doing crazy things.
Fire!
You know what you're doing. You know who your file partner is.
Excellent.
You can do it in a fluid, flexible way, and it can even get really messed up, but you know enough what's supposed to be happening that you just kind of go with it and keep it going, and we'll sort it out later. Yeah.
I read that the
Are we ready?
Are we ready?
Ready!
so
Second section, make ready!
back and forth.
Present!
Not everybody shooting in the
Fire!
Swap out.
Swap out! Move!
Yes.
Firing by
So early in
section
the war,
at the
absolutely,
withdrawal.
the the bayonet, and the British would count on the bayonet. Just give them the bayonet and they will run away. At the Battle of Hubbardton, Vermont, in July of 1777, Warner's Regiment, the 11th Massachusetts, and the 2nd New Hampshire faced the British Light Infantry and Grenadiers. So this was the best of Burgoyne's army against the best of the Northern American army at the time. And several bayonet charges were launched by the British during that attack, and they described them being broken by musketry alone.
Go past. Other side of the structure. There you go.
Yes.
Set that
Yeah.
line.
Good!
Did the colonial militias rely on bayonets at all?
So
Shall we reload?
No, yes.
a lot of them didn't have bayonets.
Shot.
Returns for Warner's Regiment of equipment seem to indicate somewhere on the order of 80 to 90% did not have a bayonet at any given time. And so technically they wouldn't have relied on them for that. Also, it's hard to launch a bayonet charge in forest. The Battle of Hubbardton happened in a field, but that's because they were camped there and that was the field. A lot of what they would be doing is small parties, raids, screening. So a lot of the actions that Warner's Regiment were involved in were small actions, or a couple of companies from Warner's Regiment out beyond the main American force. The Battle of Hubbardton was an exception. The Battle of Bennington. But again, the militia were holding the center at Bennington, and Warner's Regiment went around to each flank to attack the Hessian and Brunswicker forces that they encountered.
Now so Warner, you said he got incorporated into the Continental Army.
Yep.
So were people who would originally come on the New York grants, were they joining that at the same time, or are they
Recruitment for Warner's Regiment sort of spread over time. Seth Warner was from Connecticut. Ethan Allen was from Connecticut. So there was a lot of recruiting going on in Connecticut. There was a lot of recruiting going on in the Green Mountains, in upstate New York. Kind of all of those areas fed in. Eventually they were getting a lot of, the Dutch or Palatine Germans would enlist as well. And the borders of Vermont were changing. So in 1778 and then again in 1780, Vermont incorporated large parts of what's now New Hampshire and then returned them because Congress freaked out. The second time they incorporated a bunch of New Hampshire, they also incorporated a bunch of New York as well. And that's where Vermont and New York almost went to war with each other during the American Revolution, as both sides sent armed forces into that disputed territory.
Is that when Ethan Allen was thinking about breaking away from the revolution? Was he
Ethan Allen was captured in an attack on Montreal in fall of 1775, and he spent the next 2 to 3 years in British captivity. In 1778, he was released, came back to Vermont, and held a number of posts from then on, and continued to be an influential figure, not quite as much as he had been before he was captured.
okay?
One of the Green Mountain Boys from New Haven, Vermont, was a man named Justice Sherwood. And when the revolution started to transition from we're really mad at Parliament and we hope the king hears us and puts Parliament in its place to, okay, the king has sided with Parliament and now we're fighting for independence, a lot of people who had been part of this protest movement rethought things. And so Justice Sherwood became a loyalist. A lot of his land was confiscated. He was sold, he fled to Canada and was active in the British Secret Service. He led raids down Otter Creek. And so when the Continental Congress kept siding with New York and not allowing Vermont to become a state, and etc., Justice Sherwood prevailed on the British government there, the view that they have to be unhappy with the choices they've made. I know these people, I was one of them. I can go talk to them and bring them back into the fold. So he went and had a meeting with Ethan Allen and said, I want to talk about opening a line of communication that could result in Vermont becoming a British province. Allen immediately said, heck no, get out. But then talked to Thomas Chittenden and Ira Allen and said, whoa, let's talk about this. Historians have debated ever since how serious the talks were, whether it was sort of them stringing the British along or whether they really ever intended for there to be a reunion. I think they would have gone with wherever they could get the biggest deal that they could get away with. So I don't think there really was ever much of a chance of reunion because the people in Vermont at that time weren't really in support of it.
Right.
But I think they would have if they could have, if that was the better deal.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sure. But again, though, like this is an independent country that the United States has said, we're not really going to do much to help you because we don't quite trust you. You've been a pain for a while now. That the British are sort of breathing down the throat of, right? They've burned all of Addison County. They're raiding the Royalton raid, so they're starting to hit on the other side of the Green Mountains. And I think there's a fair amount of fear that alone we can't stand up to them. And I think there was also a certain amount of resentment against the United States because they had made sort of a series of, if you return the parts of New Hampshire you stole, we'll talk about statehood. And then that gets returned, and then the statehood thing goes away really quickly after the carrot's gone.
Clearly you wouldn't bend the government. Theoretically, so shaky.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yep.
How do they carry that out? What was your process?
Stole isn't the right word. So Vermont declares independence, and for a year it's governed by a committee from New York. So the Vermont Constitution of 1777 has this preamble in the beginning that's sort of like the United States Declaration of Independence. Here's all the wrongs we've suffered and the reasons we're doing this. It's targeted almost entirely at New York. New York is apportioning its legislature by population. New Hampshire's doing the same. So either way Vermont would go, they would sort of be a powerless rump to this other state. And so they created their own government with sort of an equal representation among towns regardless of population. It would stay that way until 1965 when federal court ruled that we had to reapportion the legislature. So for the first year of Vermont's existence, it's controlled by a committee, and then elections are held, and now there is an assembly, which is the legislature. It was unicameral then, so there wasn't a Senate and a House, it was just the assembly. And one of the first things that happens when that assembly meets is a delegation comes from 16 towns in New Hampshire saying, hey, we've all voted, and we also don't really have a lot of power in New Hampshire because we're low population towns along the Connecticut River. Can we join you? And the assembly said, yeah, sure, why not? And incorporated them in. Now, Vermont having equal representation no matter how many towns there are, there's sort of two rough political factions in Vermont. One on the eastern side of the Green Mountains, one on the western side of the Green Mountains. Western side, you've got Thomas Chittenden, the Allens, and all of them, called the Bennington Party. And now they're outvoted in the assembly by this expanded Valley Party in the Connecticut River Valley. So they're trying to undermine this union as fast as they can. They kind of use the promise of statehood from Congress as a way to do that. That causes a lot of friction with the Valley Party, and so the Valley Party says, fine, we're not part of Vermont, we're considering other options. A couple years later, the Allens reconsider their position and figure, without unity within Vermont, we will be strung up by somebody eventually. So there's a convention of the Valley towns about the Connecticut River Valley towns on the Vermont side leaving Vermont and joining New Hampshire, or forming a new state in between the Green and the White Mountains that is comprised of just the Connecticut River Valley. Well, Ira Allen shows up and says, wait. What if we bring those towns back into Vermont again? And they say, and you'll support this? Yes. Okay. So now, a whole bunch more towns come that time in what's called the Second Eastern Union. To counterbalance things, that's why they took over a big part of New York, right? So this New York faction can align with the Bennington Party. We can maintain the balance of power in the assembly while increasing our borders. This actually acts as a bargaining chip with New York. Hey, if you stop your objection to us becoming a state, we'll give you back this territory you think is yours. It increases the bargaining power with New Hampshire. It solidifies Vermont's unity, and it increases the bargaining power with Great Britain and Canada. So they're playing international politics as they're doing this.
So nothing black and white.
It's the Wild West up here. Yeah.
And is this a big headache for Philadelphia and George Washington trying to keep everybody happy?
I think George Washington gets to a point where he's just sick of hearing about it and doesn't know what to make of any of it, because he's got, the Bennington Party writing to him saying one version of the story. The Valley Party's writing to him saying another version of the story. New York and New Hampshire are both mad. Mm-hmm. And yes.
He's got a water fight.
Yeah.
What finally dissolved it? Obviously it became a state, but what was the key that pushed it in that direction?
There were a bunch of different things that happened. So the British Secret Service in Canada was the ones doing the negotiations. But the British Secret Service in Canada was divided into different organizations. So the Army had its intelligence service. Then there was the Secret Service under Justice Sherwood running the negotiations and running its own spy networks. Off of that were other and these competing British intelligence agencies and spy networks are trying to undercut each other's contacts, and we're the ones who have the good information. Of course, the Americans are infiltrating all of their spy networks and creating contacts, and the British are doing the same. So there is this espionage war happening on the northern frontier by both sides. Eventually, Governor Haldeman says, they've been stringing us along for a couple of years now. I don't think they're serious about this. And Justice Sherwood says, no, trust me. He goes to Thomas Chittenden and says, what is the holdup? Or this is you need to give us something or this ends. And Thomas Chittenden says, it's these guys in the valley, our political opponents. if they were got rid of, there would be progress. So if you get rid of this guy who's in charge in the Connecticut River Valley, then things can start happening. So the British send a party to get him, but he's warned by a double agent, and he escapes. And this really shows the British that a lot of our contacts that we thought were reliable are not. And so the different factions are going to argue over who tipped him off and who's reliable and who isn't, such that it completely undoes the British Secret Service from Canada. So they can't really, their spy network falls apart because everyone is suspect at this point.
So this is, all encapsulated here, the entirety of a Continental Army's laundress kit. So this weekend I portrayed the laundress to this regiment. I distilled my own lye with this leach barrel and soapstone. So this is a barrel that I fill with ashes and hay as a filtration. And the pouring of water onto the barrel, which has holes in the bottom, it is going to sluice out this groove carved in the stone, and that is going to collect the highly alkali liquid from the ashes, which is lye. And so this I can use to make a rudimentary soft soap, or I can also use that simply to soak the clothes in overnight. And that is going to loosen up a lot of the dirt molecules and make that easier to wash come morning. So laundry is a process of many different stages, and I will be talking more about this in just about half an hour inside the tavern at our monthly lecture.
Okay.